Good evening and welcome to Being Online and Being Okay. My name is Michael Morrier and I'm the Program Committee Chair for the Atlanta Autism Consortium Board of Directors. The Atlanta Autism Consortium is a nonprofit organization dedicated to creating collaboration and conversation throughout the Metro Atlanta autism community and beyond. Throughout the year, we host free programs just like this on a wide variety of topics, and the entire AAC Board of Directors are so glad that you've joined us tonight. Just before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. As an attendee, your microphone and camera will remain muted, but you can ask questions you have throughout the program in the chat box at the bottom of the screen. We're going to save them all until each presenter has gone, and then we'll ask them all to all three at the end. Additionally, this session is being recorded and will be posted on the AAC's YouTube channel in a few weeks. We will be mailing out notification when it's available, as well as contact information for the panelists and anything else that they want to share with you all. And we will use the email address you used when you registered for the program. Tonight, we are joined by Dr. Tyler Whitney, Stephen Forsythe, and Dr. Elizabeth Roberts. I'm honored that these three agreed to participate in this panel presentation. All three have more knowledge and vast knowledge and expertise on how to keep us all safe online than I do, so I'm really looking forward to this. Um, the information they're going to be presenting is excellent. I heard a brief preview the other day, and I know everyone that's here will find the information immediately helpful and applicable to their daily lives. And with that, we will start with Dr. Tyler Whitney.
Thanks so much, Michael. I am really happy to be here. I am happy to be a board member of the Atlanta Autism Consortium, past president of the Atlanta Autism Consortium. But I am honored to have my colleagues, Stephen Forsythe and Dr. Elizabeth Roberts with me, because I think when you're talking about being online and being safe online, I think there are more than just the initial question, how do you stay safe online? I think we have to talk about the data that we know. And I think we have to talk about the change in our world as we know it. And then I think we have to talk about what we can do differently and how we can support ourselves, first of all, but then also to support our children. Because some of the things that are being said about the online world today is that the health of our society, the health of our civilization, depends on the development of our children. And I think tonight's topic will clearly address that. Our society today has been described as digital, distracted, lonely, and sexualized. And I think all of those descriptors are a reasonable way to look at the difference from the world that I grew up in and the world that a lot of people, born before 1995 grew up in. So just to take us back, just to tell you a perspective of my own, I grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah. I grew up on a hill on the East Bench that, surrounds the center of Salt Lake City. And on all four sides of the mountains, that's how I became able to tell direction. I could tell which were the West Mountains, which were the East Mountains, North and South. And so you can imagine taking the Utah boy out of Utah, one of the difficulties is learning to tell directions. And thank goodness now we have GPS and those kind of things, but it was a lot simpler back then for me. Another thing that was simpler was on my street, there were lots of kids my age, lots of kids in an age range that was familiar to me. And I think the kids kind of know who is age appropriate in an age range for them, because I can remember when I was a child that, kids that were up to 3, 4, 5 years younger than me and 3, 4, 5 years older than me interacted. But there were critical points where there were cutoffs and those kind of things. We did things like, play kickball, play baseball. Because we lived on a hill, we would take our skateboards and we would do S curves down the hill that got going down towards the city. We'd get down to the bottom of the hill, and our neighbors knew us well enough that we'd be walking up the hill and they'd say, "Hey, you want to ride?" And obviously, who can imagine that today with somebody stopping that, maybe your child knows or maybe doesn't know so well, and the adult saying to the child, "Hey, do you want to ride?" Our kids would run. They would be absolutely terrified. Those kind of things, right? So as we move on, a lot of the information that I'm pulling from, the data that I'm pulling from, was a Harris poll conducted by Jonathan Haidt, who is famous for writing a book that has been a New York Times bestseller for the last several years called The Anxious Generation. And the children in that poll were 8 to 12 years old. And then also the Pew Research Center from 2022 that had over 1,000 13 to 16 years old. And then some of the numbers that are a little bit more dubious are coming from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. But what I want to focus on when I give you these numbers is I want to focus on the idea that as we go through these numbers, that these are simply a setup for us to understand the conditions that we're looking at from a data standpoint, and that I'm really going to rely on my colleagues, Stephen Forsyth and Dr. Elizabeth Roberts, to talk to us about what we can do now, and then also to tie in the autism spectrum disorder piece that we're going to talk more about. So most of us understood back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, and even as much as 2010, that there was a change in the way that childhood was lived. In the 70s and 80s, particularly, there was a lot of outside play. Kids were allowed to do a lot of things individually. They were allowed to go places and do things, told to be home by a certain time. Our world has changed dramatically to the point where, we're even tracking one another, not just parents tracking children, but parents tracking other adults, those kind of things, because we always have a need to do that and because the technology is available. Some of the things that leads to ask or begs to ask the question is, do we feel like things are spiraling out of control? I mean, are things getting weirder and weirder in our world? And I think the answer to that is emphatically yes. I think before the middle 2000s, 2010, I think most of us were techno optimists. We believed in the advance of our world, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the introduction of the internet, those kind of things. But as all good things do, a lot of things come to an end, right? So, a lot of people talk about COVID and they talk about the idea that COVID was the time that our world actually got a lot scarier. Well, I would like to suggest that, from the data that we have, that things started to go more horrifically wrong uh, between 2010 and 2012. And there are things that we can point to when we talk about these things, and it was slower in the 70s and 80s for young men, but they were fading from kind of the interactional face-to-face kind of interactions. The girls, on the other hand, not so much. So one of the things that's suggested about this data is that we were overprotecting our kids from the outside world, and we were underprotecting them as the new technology and the online technology developed. And one of the places we can see that is in education. The PISA scores are the scores of 15-year-olds around the world. In the United States, for instance, had a general positive trend, albeit slow, because it's difficult to change the math and the reading scores of an entire nation. We were making pretty good progress from 1970 until about 2010. And then you couple that with the nation's report card, which measures just the United States growth between that time, and we were making progress. Now you could see a dip when COVID hit, and you could see those things were happening, but we could clearly see that it was starting to happen much earlier than that, almost a decade before that. And it was replaced by, for those that were born between, after 1995, which encompasses the range between 93 and 97, there was a clear decline in academic performance, and there was an escalation in mental health issues, particularly depression and anxiety. And, for most people, they say, well, okay, well, there's some things that are happening in the world that could cause that. For boys, we saw a little bit of an escalation. We saw between 5% jump to about 12% over a year. And for girls, we saw that number jump from 12% to about 30% over a year starting in 2010. Now, that was just the beginning. That was the first wave. That was where you were seeing computers in most homes and those types of things. But you saw increased self harm and you saw an increase in suicidality. In fact, the girls' trend in self harm and suicidality would top out 67% higher in 2013. And it started to spike, in 2012, 2013 at 60 some odd percent and spiked out a year later at 134% in a single year. So that was kind of difficulty that the world was facing. One of the problems that came with that, though, was the idea that we were seeing waves of technology. So computers gave way to social networking systems. Social networking systems were initially what individuals were being allowed to say hello to each other on and kind of introduce themselves on. And that was then coupled with smartphones. And in a blink of an eye, boom, everything changes, right? So you see, it wasn't just the United States. You see that it was other countries across the world, and that the percentage was higher than any other generation that we have data on. So to couple those numbers with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children in 2023, they had 186,800 cyber tips that were recorded for online solicitation between 21 and 23, a 300% increase. But then in 24 through October 5th, you saw that go astronomically higher to 456,000 cyber tips. So that tells you that our external world was being infiltrated from the internal world or from the internet. Okay. So when we think about those things and we think about the things that cause, the loneliness, the friendlessness, the academic decline, girls are more sensitive to certain things. They're more sensitive to visual social comparison, Instagram being the worst offender on that one, perfectionism, relational aggression, and they share emotions more than boys do. So they're more prone or more vulnerable to online attacks or bullying, those kind of things. They're also more they're more susceptible to sociogenic transmission. So it's described by Jonathan Haidt and Zach Roush as, and I thought this was fascinating, TikTok Tourette's, or the idea that they are looking at TikTok so much that it's almost like a habitual parasympathetic response as opposed to something that they were choosing to do. Okay. So the members of Gen Z are less likely to do the things that are listed right here. And I won't take the time to go through all of those, but as you can see, these are things that are done interpersonally and things that you aren't necessarily going to do online. One of the things that I find fascinating with people that come into my office is that they don't know how to plan an activity, that they don't know how to ask their friends to go and do something in person, that a lot of this stuff has to be set up for them. And that is a real retraction as far as that goes. Now, let's talk a little bit about the boys and what happened to the boys, because the boys' decline was much less significant. And so when you look at the numbers, you see the girls decline more of a hockey stick presentation when you're talking about the jump in anxiety, depression. The boys' retreat really started in the 70s when they started academically underperforming and doing those things, retreating from the real world. Because the virtual world welcomes them, almost like Ulysses and the Sirens when we think of Greek and Roman mythology, that kind of thing. Because that world welcomes them, they also have a disintegration of skills related to pornography. They don't know how to talk to people that they are interested in a higher level relationship with, and the drive diminishes because of that as well. They also have multiplayer games that are addictive and isolating. They like the dopamine hits. And a lot of people that come to my office that play a lot of video games will say, if I'm not allowed to play video games or if I have to stay away from them for a while, I'm irritable and I'm unhappy, which is because of the resultant withdrawal from family and school. Because they're not doing things interpersonally, what you find is that they are actually not experiencing problem solving. They are not experiencing the failures that come with day-to-day interactive types of things and those kind of things, right? They traded in what was considered to be a free play type of a life, the 1970s through 2010, for what was to become a phone-based kind of a life, and where everything became online and everything that they needed in their lives required them to be online, to the point where the average online numbers now are about 9 hours a day, 5 of which can be social media. Okay. So this is the Pew Research stuff that you see that came in 2022, right? And as you can see, there's a massive jump away from, what was initially the internet in Facebook, right? And you see the jump to Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, things that have much more function in the applications, right? And then you see the boys and girls numbers. And what you see when you're looking at this, and they're also looking at different ethnic backgrounds and those kind of thing, urban, suburban, socioeconomic status. And as you can see, all of those numbers are becoming more and more prolific to the side of being online. All right. So this is a shock slide, right? And if you say 20% of teens say that they are on YouTube almost constantly, that's a big disruptor, right? Because you're talking about, and if you think about it, there's a guy named Tristan Harris that identified this stuff when he worked at Google, and he said, he did a documentary called The Social Dilemma, and it's on Netflix, right? And it talks about the way that the internet controls us with algorithms and those kind of things. But those are the types of things that you think about that steal the ability to learn from our kids. It's absolutely baffling to me because I love movies and I love cinema, that kids literally don't have the attention anymore to sit through a full-length feature film. You know, that's pretty crazy. And then when you find that half of the kids that are online and they're spending time not only on different parts of the internet but on social media, over half of them say they don't know that they could give it up, that it would be very, very difficult for them to do that. With that being said, we've talked about these things, and we've talked about what the difference is from a gender standpoint, and we've talked about how readily it is available to everyone. You're talking about things like, sleep deprivation. You're talking about things like, the inability to interact not only with your family, but with peers and those kind of things, and all of the other things that are affected here. I really appreciate your time and appreciate you listening. And I'm going to pass you on to Stephen Forsyth, who is a technology guru. He's my technology guru professionally, and he also has a real job, but he does some stuff for me as well. And let him talk a little bit about the things that we can do to get a handle on what I feel is like a runaway train right now. Thanks so much. I appreciate your time.
Thanks so much, Tyler. I think this sets the stage really well for the conversation that we need to have. And what I want to do is continue that and talk about some of the practical things that we can do to use technology in a way that benefits our children instead of is a detriment to them. And so a little bit about my background first is I have been in information security for about the last 15 years. Just for everybody on the call, I am the only presenter tonight that doesn't have a PhD. But I do have extensive experience in the information security area. I also have two teenagers, and I think that in itself gives me a lot of experience and helps me to not only be able to teach about these subjects, but also to relate to the challenges that come with managing technology and using it to help our kids. So I want to talk about what the role of technology is, and then talk about a little bit about modifying behavior. So like I said, I don't have a PhD, and I do lean on my colleagues here a lot for the behavioral aspects of this conversation. But I do want to talk about the way that we can use technology to improve our kids' behavior, and that we can use technology not as a detriment, but as an advantage in helping manage our kids' behavior. And then how we think about the problem, what tools are available, and how we make a plan and stick to it. So first is the role of technology. And really, we live in a time when technology truly defines how we interact with the world, truly from what we eat to what we do in our recreational time, to how we manage at our work, to what we do for leisure. Technology truly defines almost every aspect of how we interact with the world. I find it interesting now that we can't even go to a football game or a concert without using technology to scan our ticket every time we go into the arena or the theater. And in many cases, this technology was not designed to be accessible to those with differing abilities. So speaking specifically for kids with autism spectrum, um, the technology just was not designed with them in mind. It was designed with the easiest user in mind. And we have to take that into account when we are managing this technology with our kids, because often the way they interact and they view this technology is a lot different than the way you and I interact with it. The other thing about the internet is that it's so vast. It covers the entire world. There is no one place that you can go and say, this is the internet. The internet is everywhere, it starts everywhere, and it ends everywhere. And that means that it can be everything from very uplifting and very wholesome to very dangerous and very difficult to manage. And because it's so vast, as parents, we often have this, well, if I can't know everything, then I'm not going to do anything. And the mindset is that we should manage what we can. There is no magic bullet. There is nothing we can do to protect everything that our children do online. But there are things that we can do, and that's where these steps come in. The other challenge that we have is that there's no single trusted source. So there is no government agency in any country. There is no community resource. There is no truly single trusted source that can help us to safely manage technology. And often the very same people that say they are protecting us are the people that we should actually be most afraid of. And so it's a very confusing world and a very challenging one to manage. Finally, for our kids, even without any ill intent, technology can cause trouble. So even when they're trying to use technology to improve their lives, such as at school or in other settings with friends, or just to simply play a leisure game, it can become a dangerous environment really quickly. And that means that we need to be on guard as parents um, to help them to manage that use of that technology so that it doesn't cause trouble for them. So, like I said, I want to talk about a little bit about how we modify behavior. And the first thing I want to get out is that there is no single proven method that will always modify behavior. We really have to learn with and learn from our kids on how to help shape their behavior. So I have two children. They're about 3 years apart in age, and they're both very well into their teenage years now. And what works with one doesn't work with the other. And what works with the other never worked with the first one. And I imagine that that's the same because I see it in families all the time that I work with to help them manage their technology with their children. So we have to be sensitive to what their particular needs are. And especially in the case of autism spectrum, we need to understand where their maturity lies and how we can help them individually. And we often think of rewards and punishments, and that's truly the heart of modifying behavior, but it's not as simple as that. We have to know what things are rewarding to them and what things are punishing to them, and understand that as we apply these steps to help them to manage their behavior. One thing I have found, and chief among them, is that simple, frequent, and quick feedback, meaning that we do it right after the behavior occurs, are important when we're looking to help our kids change their behavior. So that means that as soon as a misstep happens, we need to be aware of it, and we need to take simple actions quickly to help them to modify their behavior. So when we take a step back and we think about this problem, what problem are we actually trying to solve? First of all, we need to communicate with our kids what the problem is. We want to protect them from the internet and from the dangerous things that are out there. We don't want to limit them. We don't want to take things away from them unnecessarily. We just want to protect them. And we have to be seen as their advocate and not their adversary. As soon as our kids see us as their adversary, they're going to increase their resistance and work against us to manage their behavior. If they see us as an advocate, someone who is trying to help them, then they will see eventually that we are on their side, that we're trying to help them to use technology in a way that is safe and healthy for them, to give them the tools that they need to manage in the world that we live in. Because not using technology just isn't really an option in the world that we live in. We have to help them manage their use of technology. So anytime we seek to correct behavior, it has to come from a position of love for them and not out of anger. I know it's a very stressful thing to see your child do something or access something that is either beyond their maturity level, puts them in harm's way, or perhaps hurts another person. And that those can be very stressful, intense situations. I've been in a number of those situations myself, including situations where children got in trouble with the law or with their school. And it's really easy to turn to anger, but remember, we have to be there first as their advocate. We have to be someone who is on their side and who wants the best things for them, which means that anger is not going to correct their behavior. It has to come from a love for them, to show them that we care about the outcome of them learning how to manage technology, and that we understand that it's not always going to happen the way they want it to, or the way that we want it to. The one thing we know as parents is that kids need boundaries to regulate their behavior. So they say that the frontal cortex of a human doesn't mature fully until around age 25, depending on the individual, of course. And until that time, especially impulse control is severely limited. And we need to help them with boundaries to regulate that behavior and give them an opportunity to make decisions before they have to experience the consequences of those decisions. So frequently, I ask my children, do you want the consequences that are attached to this decision? And if the answer to that is no, then I say, then maybe you should pick a different decision. And we give them boundaries, again, because we love them and because we want to show them how to modify their behavior while they are working through that maturity process of them being able to manage their own central nervous system. So all that comes down to, I'm the tech guy. I'm supposed to tell you all the magic tools that are available to fix everything. The first thing that I want to say before I even show the first thing on this slide is that there is no magic tool available. There is no product that you can buy that will 100% effectively protect your children from threats online. And there is nothing that you can purchase that is just going to manage away your responsibility for what your children do online. That means that we can use tools as a part of our behavior management process. And that means that we have to be involved in not only the learning process, learning how these tools work, but also learning how to apply them to our individual children's circumstances. So all of the major smartphone manufacturers, Apple, Google, and Samsung, have available parental controls for their mobile devices. I will say, in my experience, both as a parent and as a professional doing this on a day-to-day basis, I will say that Apple is the leader in this space. They have, through their screen time, the best tools to manage parental controls on mobile devices. It syncs across devices. It's fairly simple to set up and manage. You can even see certain things from your device without ever having to look at your child's device. That said, it does require frequent follow-up, and it does require you to be aware and involved and present when your kids are using technology, especially when you're first introducing them to devices. You need to be doing frequent follow-ups and frequent looks at what they are actually accessing and using on those mobile devices, because none of these parental controls are perfect, and none of them will protect you 100% from all threats, and all of them have to be tuned for your particular situation. That means that it's going to take time and effort on your part to work through getting that set up correctly. The other tool is that every major router manufacturer and internet service provider almost universally offers home Wi-Fi controls. That means we can turn devices on and off that do and do not have access to our Wi-Fi. We can protect the password. We can filter certain types of content. We can specifically block websites. We can specifically block devices at certain times of the day. So that gives us some ability to prevent access to things that we don't want our children accessing. Now, I will tell you, primarily as a child that once was trying to break all these things, all of them can be broken. You can work around every single one of these issues, every single one of these protection devices without too much difficulty. There's guides on the internet to do it, in fact. So you can go to YouTube and find out how to get around a lot of these parental controls. So that's, again, why it's so critical that this is part of the response, not a magic bullet to just guarantee that we have protection from all threats. So I will say something about gaming device manufacturers. So this is your Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo Switch. There are very limited options available for gaming devices. Even the Steam platform, which is used commonly in PC gaming, has very limited parental controls. And this is both a challenge, but it's also an opportunity for us to be deeply involved in what our kids are doing. So that means that gaming devices are something that we have to be extra careful around. We can, if they're at home, use certain Wi-Fi controls, like I've shown above, that will allow you to protect when it can access the internet. But what it accesses once it is out to the internet is very limited in terms of what we can control. So again, no tool is perfect. We use this as a supplement to working directly with our kids. That means when I sit down for the first time with a child getting a device for the first time, whatever age the parents feel is appropriate, and I will 100% defer to the parents for when they think it is appropriate to first give their children technology. But what I will say is that it needs to begin with a discussion about limits, a discussion about what the phone is allowed to be used for and what it's not allowed to be used for, and set very clear expectations. So the expectations come first, the screen time and those controls come after. And not only does it happen the first day that we give them a device, but it happens on a regular basis after we give them that device. One of the greatest things that these platforms provide in terms of the router manufacturers and the manufacturer screen time controls is the ability to access the history of what's been used on a particular device. So that means we can see how long they were using a particular app, what kinds of websites they visited, how long they spent, what times they were using those devices, what times they were visiting what websites. And that gives, as a parent, that gives you a lot of insight into what your child's behavior is like. If you initially see that they're using a device when they should be doing something else, say a chore or perhaps homework, then it may be time for a different control or at least a conversation. So this is just one example of what we can use, the tools that we have to provide that visibility, and then a conversation about accountability for how we are using that technology. So um, this wouldn't be complete without a discussion about dedicated devices. So one example would be the Bark phone. This has become very popular with parents that I've worked with, that they can set up a Bark phone, hand it to their child, and think that everything is okay. Um, if you have some spare time and if you're interested, I would encourage you to Google disable Bark phone. And there are YouTube tutorials out there that will show your child exactly how to disable the controls on the Bark phone and how to get around them. So while these devices seem tempting for a parent, there is no magic bullet. There is no magic tool that will prevent our kids from accessing things when they shouldn't. If they want to get around these controls, they will find a way. So that's why the most important thing is to have a conversation. One thing I will say, and I believe Dr. Roberts is going to touch on this as well, is the importance of keeping technology in public areas of our home. So in my house, that means that phones are not used when you're in your room. Phones can be used when you're out in public areas. Computers and other screens are out in places where I can just come down the stairs and happen to walk by and see what you're doing on your computer. This is there for our children's protection. That means if I walk by and they suddenly switch tabs, then I'm going to take an extra close look at what's going on that device. Not that I wasn't looking before, but this gives me an extra opportunity to see and help them understand that there may be a moment to teach. So all of this is great. All of these tools are wonderful tools, and I encourage all of you to investigate the use of these tools as they apply. But the key is that once you make a plan, you need to stick to it. Accountability and consistency are key to helping our kids use technology in a way that is healthy and appropriate for their age and maturity. They're looking for us to be the leaders and to assist them in navigating using technology. When they were born, they had never used a smartphone, and we have had smartphones longer than they have. That means that we should be the leaders, both by example, by showing them that we know how to put our phones down, we know how to stop viewing reels for eternity on Facebook and Instagram, and that we can show them, maybe not as well as they, maybe we're not as adept as they are, but we can show them how to use technology and show them how to navigate the use of technology to use it as a beneficial tool and not as something that is going to be harmful to ourselves or to people around us. That means that you're going to have to learn. You don't necessarily need to know more than your kids, but you do need to understand what you're doing with your devices and what they're doing with their devices, especially. You need to understand that while YouTube may seem innocuous, that there's actually a lot of harmful material that's accessible on YouTube. And it's not very difficult to create a new account to hide from your parents. So you need to understand that those things exist and that the ability is out there so that you can not detect every possible way to circumvent these controls, but you can detect the most likely ones, like let's say VPN software, for example, that could mitigate a lot of the controls that we are putting in place. What I have found is that once you start a plan, if you gave your kids access to technology without a plan and now you're trying to kind of rein things in, it can often take months to start to see consistent changes in the way they interact with technology, and especially the way they interact with you. But once they see you being consistent, then they will start to fall in line and they will start to understand what the benefits are to them. And the one thing I don't want to spoil for you is that your kids are probably never going to thank you for what you've done to help them manage technology. Um, Again, like I said, I have two teenagers and I fully understand this. And I know that they're not going to thank you, but this is so important to their growth and maturity that I feel it's 110% worth it to see them develop a healthy relationship with technology. The other thing that I'll mention is a lot of kids grow up in a situation where one or both parents is away for some reason or another. This could be due to death, divorce, remarry, a number of circumstances. And one of the keys is that all of the parents in that child's life are on the same page. Kids will be able to detect really quickly who is the soft parent, and they will use it to their advantage every time. And it's very easy to get away from the plan if somebody's not on the same page. And that may mean compromise, that may mean making certain concessions. And I fully understand the challenges that come with a mixed family. And the flip side to that is that I have also seen what a mixed family can do, how they can be a powerful parenting force, sometimes even in greater numbers than a traditional family. So I really believe that it's possible and it's achievable, but it does take a little bit more planning and a little bit more discussion between the parents to make sure that they're behaving consistently according to the plan that you've built. So again, my name is Stephen Forsyth. My contact information will be included. I'm so grateful for the opportunity that we have to have this discussion tonight. I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Elizabeth Roberts, and she's going to share even more behavioral facts that we can use to help our kids. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. My name is Dr. Liz Roberts, and I'm a clinical psychologist and neuropsychologist. I've specialized in autism for the last 25 years, and over the last couple of years, I've become involved in trying to understand and support individuals, autistic individuals who've gotten mixed up in the criminal justice system. So let's get started. So I want to just talk today about some of the vulnerabilities associated with autism spectrum disorder that can lead to terrible tragedies for our children and teens and young adults. First, I'll be talking a little bit about styles of thought in autism, and then I'll be talking a little bit about language and communication vulnerabilities. I want to talk a little bit about theory of mind, which I'll define and discuss, and how that affects children's vulnerability to getting involved in very unhealthy situations online. And then I will also talk about the dearth of typical social experiences that autistic kids and teens and young adults experience, and how we can try to ameliorate that. And then I want to touch a little bit on their proneness to gravitating toward a very indoor sedentary life that then, involves, as Stephen was saying, hours and hours spent online. I want to talk about vulnerability specifically around sexuality, and then touch on problematic pornography use and the limitations that we have in our sex education structure today in the United States, and what we can do about that. So if you are parents of autistic children, you'll know that one of the hallmark features of autism is a real difficulty with flexible thinking. And so autistic people are more likely to have black and white thinking and literal thinking, very concrete thinking, and then to be very rigid and inflexible in their thinking. So specifically, I want to give a little example of black and white thinking in the world of sexuality that goes awry for young men. Is that young men might gravitate towards websites that might tell them that might convey very black and white, rigid ideas about sexuality and romance. And so, for example, if you have failed to attract a romantic partner, you will be very drawn to very black and white thinking about how, for example, women are only attracted to tall men or non-autistic men or men of a certain, race, or men who are wealthy or men who are handsome, and so on. And this quickly becomes very black and white thinking, and it's very, very hard to, but very necessary to talk to children and teens and young adults about nuanced thinking about finding someone to love and finding someone with whom to have a relationship. An example of literal thinking that I want to give is one that occurred in my practice in the legal world. An individual I worked with went on a website that was designated as being an adult pornography website and had a label on it that had a reference to a government entity that certified that it only had adult pictures on the website. This person then spent time on the website, and it was abundantly clear that the pictures were of minors, but because the label said that they were all adults, he completely ignored his own sensory input. The label overrode what his own mind was telling him. So that's just a very literal interpretation of what's going on. Kids and young adults become very rigid when you try to discuss with them nuance or context or critical thinking about what they're doing. They can get very, very concrete, very, very stuck on their own ideas, and it's very hard to get them to change their mind. So Michelle Garcia Winner, who has a whole social thinking curriculum, talks about rock brain. It's very hard to get them to shift and think about things a different way. I want to talk a lot about obsessionality. One of the hallmarks of autism spectrum disorder is the presence of narrow circumscribed interests. And so our teens and young adults are very set up to become highly obsessional about what they're looking at online. And they begin obsessionally collecting images and downloading them and saving them, having no idea, in fact, that they might be charged later with possession of illegal material from the internet. And most of the clients with whom I work will tell me, I didn't even look at most of the stuff I downloaded. They were very busy cataloging and categorizing and putting them into different files in this very obsessional way. And really weren't even looking at this stuff and had no idea that they were breaking the law. So that obsessionality can be a huge Achilles heel for our group. We have a lot of autistic kids in our life who are extremely bright and extremely verbal, and the mechanics and language complexity and syntax and grammar and so on are at a very high level. However, if you live with someone with autism, you'll know that they often completely misunderstand the intent of what someone is saying. So for example, they might engage in a chat online and have very little ability to understand that the person with whom they're interacting does not have their best interests at heart, and might be, there might be all sorts of clues that a non-autistic person could see in the text that a person with autism would miss entirely. In the use of language, there can be very poor word choice and a real absence of theory of mind. What I mean by that is a significant inability to imagine how my words are landing on another person, but also to imagine the beliefs and the thoughts and the experiences of the listener, of the person with whom you're interacting. So for example, an example drawn again from my own legal experience, there was an adult actually who got involved in an undesirable sexual experience, and then began texting about the experience with his friend and said, well, I didn't rape her. And this is a bad idea to introduce the word rape in a text with someone when nobody brought up the question of rape. So there's often a language limitation that leads to very poor choice of words and a complete inability to think ahead about how that could be misunderstood later. Furthermore, if a child or teen or young adult is coerced online to go look at something or share something or download something, their spidey sense might tell them that this is a bad idea, but they may lack the language skills to find a way to say no, among other problems. But there's a language vulnerability that often runs through a lot of these scenarios. And finally, they might lack the words, apart from the motivation or other issues, to ask for help from a trusted family member, parent, or even sibling. So they might think they alerted people to the fact that they're having a problem. They might, but they might not have communicated what they're experiencing. So as I said, what is theory of mind? Theory of mind is my ability to understand that Steve or Dr. Whitney or anyone else has an entirely different set of beliefs and thoughts and experiences than I do. So I might like pizza, but I know that Steve might or might not like pizza, and so on. I might have watched a movie last night, but I know that not everyone watched the movie. So autistic people have a hard time thinking about other people's minds and understanding that other people have a different set of beliefs and thoughts and experiences. So when a teenager or young adult is looking at pornography online, I often ask them in the work I do, what were you did you consider that that was a human being in the photo? And invariably they will answer, I never thought about that. So they are not inclined to be socially curious about other people. That's the heart of autism in many ways. But they also do not consider what a figure in a photo might be experiencing or thinking. It literally never enters their mind. They also they have a vague idea that what they're doing is wrong, but they really never sit down and carefully think about how society will be viewing what I'm doing right now. They really don't think that through. The other feedback I get almost always is this belief that whatever experience I have on the internet is not actually real. It isn't real. It's not the same as reality. And so it's very hard for autistic people to imagine that an image they're looking at is of a real person. Finally, there is a lot of social naivete about so-called friends on the internet. So frequently, teenagers and young adults will migrate into websites and look at images, some of which are legal, some of which might be illegal. And they invariably get involved in chats with other individuals. And those individuals might be phishing. That would be presenting yourself as someone you're not, and will invariably present themselves as a friend who has good intentions to help that person with their quote unquote problem, and invite them to look at different things or share different images and to sort of stay in the gang. And because of all this social naivete, they are not aware that these are not friends. These are actually people who have ill intent. Finally, there's a lot of social naivete about my own peers. So if I'm autistic, I might have some friends, or I might have people in my life who pretend to be my friend, who may suggest that I do something, make a poor choice on the internet. And because I'm autistic, I have trouble understanding that what I see with my eyes, which is a smiling person who seems friendly, is not actually, again, working in my best interest. So all of this I bring up because we have to work as parents and therapists and professionals to help autistic people with these vulnerabilities. Finally, there is just a limitation in social curiosity that characterizes autism. And so that includes not only other people, what are other people thinking, but what is going on with me? It's the rest, other people are socially curious about oneself and about other people. Autistic people have to work harder over time to reflect and show curiosity even about themselves, let alone other people. So these are some of the vulnerabilities that can lead to some really bad choices online. As we know, there can be a complete absence of peer relationships. It's completely tragic to to meet with children, as I do in my practice, and teenagers and young adults and adults who literally have not one single friend. So they often have experienced lifetime rejection by same-sex peers. And as they go into puberty and the kids in their class start to pair off and have dating experiences and so on, they begin to experience rejection by potential romantic partners. So there is, as a result, a complete absence of social opportunities to try out whatever skills I might actually have. So the opportunities are plummeting over time, and it's a sort of a vicious cycle, if you see my point. So someone may arrive at the age of 16 or 17 or 18 with virtually absent age-typical social skills and completely arrested development in the social world. So frequently, one of the rules of thumb we have in autism is that if someone's chronologic age is X, we subtract at least 5. So, so if an 18-year-old might be really having the maturity of a 13-year-old or a 12-year-old, and that's really where they're at socially. So they're way behind their peers, and they fall further behind because they miss out on opportunities to grow and develop those skills without any help. And most of them want to reduce their growing isolation, and they want to have a friend. So most of them truly want to have a friend, and we have to help them find friends and not get stuck in really unhealthy interactions with the internet. There are a lot of reasons why many autistic kids end up being inside all the time. Most of them, many of them have significant motor coordination delays. They're clumsy and uncoordinated. They don't like sports. And so that leisure activity and that opportunity for social skills development is not available to them in large part. Many have, as we know, sensory hypersensitivities. They don't like bugs. They might have phobias of bugs. They don't like the heat. They don't like stickiness. They don't like sweat. They don't like the smell in the forest. They don't like a variety of sensory experiences. They don't like, bug spray, and they don't like suntan lotion and so on. So it's sometimes really hard to get autistic kids outside. You have to work hard at that. And furthermore, we know that autistic people are very rigid and they desire sameness. They don't want to try new things. Novelty is very difficult because novelty is the unknown. If I don't know what's going to happen, I'm not sure I want to do it. So a parent might be trying to coax them to sign up for a sport or go somewhere, and they're very resistant to trying something that is unfamiliar. They prefer sameness. And we all know that participation on team sports is very problematic, not all the time, but much of the time, because there are a lot of social skills involved in being on a team, being sensitive to the dynamics of the team and taking turns and, negotiating and sharing and collaborating and so on. This is really hard. So it's generally better for autistic kids, or they're generally happier and more successful in single sports like swimming or track and so on. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. As Dr. Whitney alluded to, we know that a lot of internet activity is intrinsically rewarding, and so the brain is getting hit by, wonderful dopamine, and so that's all very reinforcing. And this just completely reinforces the behavior of these kids and teens who have drifted, for all the above reasons, into a very entrenched sedentary indoor life. And as we all know, parents get burned out fighting over electronics. And I think Steve had some incredibly just fantastic tips for this really tough battle in our millennium. I want to talk a little bit about sexual vulnerabilities. So in autism, there are limitations in interoception. So proprioception is knowing where my body is in space. Interoception is the ability to scan my internal experience, my body, and engage in self-observation. And in the simplest way, am I hungry? Am I thirsty? Am I full? What do I need to do to feel better? Am I too hot? Am I too cold? So there's a lot of difficulty understanding even basic biological cues. And that will include sexual cues and sexual desires. And this results in a great deal of confusion and a desire to figure something out. So Many of us don't have difficulty understanding who we're attracted to or what we like or what we want in a intimate relationship or in a sexual experience. Autistic people are sort of using a trial and error approach to actually figure out what their body is telling them. This can lead them into all kinds of trouble on the internet. So one study I found did actually find a higher than expected co-occurrence of autism and what we call paraphilias. Paraphilias are simply unusual sexual desires, but unusual by the dictates of, let's just say, society. So what I'm trying to say is that an autistic person is trying to figure out what they want sexually, and they might get involved in anime porn, they might get involved in stuffed animal porn, they might get involved in any range of atypical sexual experiences online, in an attempt to figure out what they want to do. And because, as I said, of the real atrophy in their opportunities to be intimate, either platonically or romantically with peers, and the widening gap between their skill level and the skill level of their peers, they have literally a very little or no opportunity to explore their sexuality in a healthy way, through education, by talking with parents or with peers, the way typically developing kids do. And so it's unfortunately what's happened is that they turn to the internet to try to understand things. They may feel unable to ask for help or information from adults. And so all of this leads to a more intense need than typically developing teens to try to get questions answered on the internet. And this places those teens and young adults at a greater risk of making some terrible, tragic, life-changing mistakes, inadvertently migrating to websites that contain illegal material, and getting into trouble. So I want to say, when I wrote "This has not been studied," what I mean is we're just beginning to understand all of this, and I don't want to make absolute statements about how autistic people are different from non-autistic people, but these are just ideas that require much more research. So this does lead in many cases to problematic pornography use. Kids are trying to understand their sexuality, and then they become essentially addicted to pornography. Many of the clients with whom I work tell me that they're looking at adult porn sites, or they think they're looking at adult pornography, and they may migrate into illegal websites without actually realizing it. And that first statistic up there, the average first age for USA males to look at pornography is 12. So furthermore, there's also a rigid refusal to ask for help and very inflexible, rigid thinking. And again, a real inability to sort of, as they say on Saturday Night Live, take a look at yourself. What am I doing here? What's happening here? I need some help. They have a lot of trouble doing that. So in my experience, many of the young men with whom I work have told me that they began looking at pornography as a preteen or teenager, and the images they were attracted to were images of individuals who seemed to be close to their age. That would be sort of expected. However, then they continue to look at pornography as they age into young adulthood, and while the chronologic age has progressed, the sexual maturity and mental age did not progress due to the lack of support and the lack of information and the lack of help that that's in their lives. And so they unfortunately remain stuck looking at getting sexually aroused by images of individuals who are substantially younger than they are. And this ends up being very bad for them in the long term. Just a brief word, and I want to wrap up pretty soon. There is also a real limitation right now in the sex education that we have in our public schools. It simply does not accommodate and does not meet the needs of autistic kids. We need a specialized curriculum for autistic children and teens. And we also need a curriculum that includes the identification of a set of values so that a developing person can begin to develop an idea that I want to live my life in accordance with a set of articulated values, not just vague values, that my family or my culture or my community identify as important. So you can actually verbalize and write down a set of values by which I want to live and treat other people. We don't have that, and that's for a reason in our country. But I think that we need that as part of a specialized curriculum for children with autism. They need specific information about the law, the federal law, and the law that pertains in their home state, and information about possession and distribution, what those are, and texting and sexting, and age of consent. This has to be very, very specific and concrete for people with autism. They need concrete facts about masturbation, that it's a normal part of development, but there's various things I need to know about how to manage that. Facts about pornography and what that can do to my brain and my long-term development as a person. They need social skills and dating training. And they need very concrete, direct training about how to manage their sex drive, which has accelerated biologically as they go into puberty. So briefly, I put in here a couple of wonderful resources that I refer to families to all the time. One is a wonderful book by Valerie Gauss called Living Well on the Spectrum. I strongly encourage parents of autistic children and teens and young adults to enroll them in a social skills group. Peers is a research-based social skills curriculum that I highly recommend, but there are other ones too. Michelle Garcia, and I have her website right there, runs a sex education course that's designed for individuals with vulnerabilities. And you can put your child, or you can put your teen on that and run them through that, and they can get some great education around these issues. And then Isabel Hinault is another person who has really dedicated her career to understanding and helping autistic individuals around sexuality. And she has lots of stuff on YouTube and so on. You can also find a psychologist or a social worker who can offer you parent training and coaching. And as Steve said, it's a daily commitment to keep working on this stuff. And it's really helpful to have someone on your team to help you with strategies. What should I do? How do I do that? In researching for this talk, I came across a very cool new website called Porn is Not the Norm. I was very excited to find that. It was created in the UK, and it offers straight talk about how pornography is problematic. Let's wrap up real quick. I want to make the point that, as Steve was saying, we have to work on this continually at home. We need to keep the lines of communication open and remind them that they're open. We need to convey to our children and teens it is developmentally expected that you have sexual feelings, but you must talk to a trusted person about that. That could be, it doesn't have to be mom and dad. It could be an older sibling, a cousin, someone trustworthy. Asking for help is always okay. That is a very important message. Most of the individuals I assist who have run afoul of the legal system did not ask for help, and were not given the message continually, you must ask for help. That's so important. And as we know, you must offer honest, specific, direct, and medically informed, non-judgmental talk about puberty and how to manage my emerging sex drive in a healthy way, and review the risks of exploitation. As Steve said, we have to monitor the kids' history on their electronic devices. We have to control the access. We have to supervise. We have to ask, where are they using the electronic device? In the bathroom, in the basement, at school. And we have to make rules about using that stuff in a shared space, as Steve was saying. I'm really not a big fan of Discord, so I don't know what other people think, but I think in certain cases you're really checking all the direct messaging of your kids, and you're, as I said, checking the history and so on. Finally, if you want to quit smoking and you smoke cigarettes to manage stress, you actually have to have what we call a replacement behavior. You can't just say, today I'm going to quit smoking. You have to say, when I'm stressed, I'm going to exercise, I'm going to call a friend, I'm going to cook a meal, I'm going to take a walk, I'm going to go on a hike. So we have to offer our children alternatives to essentially getting addicted to things online that are really dangerous and unhealthy. So we have to really work hard, and I know it's hard, to find situations in which your child might find a friend. So you're going to help them migrate into places where they might have things in common, a robotics club or something around one of their other narrow interests. It's going to be an activity that doesn't involve electronics. It can be an activity, a physical activity that your child accepts. So, for example, I have a picture here of fencing. I love fencing because look at how they're all glowed. They don't have to touch anything. But the point is to find a sport or an activity that gets them out of the house and gets them away from electronics and gets them with peers. And that if your child is at someone else's house or at camp or wherever, the parent, the adult who is supervising them, has to be on board with the structure. And finally, to redirect them toward a healthier narrow interest, such as anything that draws them, baseball statistics, politics, whatever hobby might intrigue them. So I want to close with the idea we can do hard things. I know we can because I help people do that all the time. And thank you so much for your attention.
And thank you, all three of you. That was great information. And there's been a lot of positive comments in the chat about how great the information is. A few questions that have come through. I'll kind of start with the most recent and go backwards, maybe. You know, Liz, you were talking about curriculum, and someone was asking, besides the ones you shared, are there other curriculums available that meet the needs of the individuals, kind of what you're talking about, or is it kind of a new thing out there?
Well, I have met Dr. Garcia and I really like her. And she has a curriculum online that you can enroll your teen or young adult in. And I think that's one of the best ones we have now. The schools are really not offering, to my knowledge, the schools are not offering specialized curricula for autistic children and teens.
The other one besides Dr. Garcia's curriculum is the EASE curriculum out of Virginia. Dr. Garcia's curriculum is intensive and it's long. It's about 18 months. The EASE curriculum is about 15 weeks and it's a little bit more intensive. That one being out of Virginia. I can share it in the chat room. But the idea is that these are curriculums that have been designed by autism educators that understand autism, and they're a little bit more specific and direct. Dr. Garcia's is called the Quality of Life curriculum, and it is simply not only relationships, but the sexuality and how sexuality fits in relationships, which is very, concrete and very literal.
Okay. And do any of you have suggestions that could help like an older teen that has a PDA profile? Like these things you recommended tend to work towards, individuals with autism, but what about the PDA profile?
I like Stephen's recommendation. Stephen, do you want to talk to him about the recommendation about how it's an everyday type of an assignment and how spending time with someone every day? Because what I feel like in autism is that overlearning is critical. So representing the same information over and over and over again, not in a way that you're bashing them with it, but in a way that you're saying, hey, I'm here. I understand, that you're not going to be perfect, but we really want to just look at the short term and we really just want to do things that will help us to slowly change or to get to where we want to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a huge part of it is when you're first introducing a device or you're changing the way you use devices at home, I think daily feedback is super critical to say, okay, what did you do online today? What did you visit? Who did you talk to? What types of activities were you engaged in? Show me some of the videos that you watched, and let's talk about why those are either beneficial or why that might be harmful. Not in the sense of I need to punish you for this, but we just need to have that discussion and re-stress some of those same principles again. And I've seen this work for kids on the spectrum. I've seen it work for kids that are neurotypical, and it's 100% effective for everyone because it's that instant feedback that is so critical, I feel.
Yeah. And someone did make a suggestion on, like showing interest in their hobbies and their ideas, and things like that as well,
Yeah.
doing that, which is great. And then Liz, you were talking about, like talking to them about relationships and how they develop. And, you know, are there good ways to ask those questions to someone about it to really get their experience of a relationship and how that develops over time?
Are you asking how to really kind of like casually or informally assess your teens' knowledge and
Yeah.
sort of skills and experience? That's a tricky one because people can be very, they have understandable privacy. I think that we all know as parents that it's all about the relationship, and again showing continual interest in what they're doing, and showing up and being there and listening. And within that context, I think you encourage your teen. It's really important for us to talk about this. Most people need help with these topics, even kids who don't have autism, and kids with autism really need help with this. And to say, I'd like to ask you a couple questions about how it's all been going for you and what you've been doing. So it's not the conversation has to occur in the context of a relationship that you commit a lot of time and effort to. I think we know that.
Okay. And just for your answer, like how do parents get past kind of the uncomfortableness of that conversation?
Mhm.
Because
Yeah.
even it's uncomfortable to
Yeah.
have.
Yeah, I think the more you do it, the easier it gets.
Okay.
And I will just say weirdly that in my legal experience, once someone is actually arrested, believe me, they start talking about a lot of stuff that they never talked about before. And they realized that they should have had these conversations earlier. And it is really uncomfortable. And I guess I could say that, being in your own therapy, of course, is might be a really good idea if you're struggling to bring up topics that feel private and uncomfortable, and just open your mouth and get going.
Okay.
I,
And then,
I think even like, sorry,
Go
I
ahead.
agree 100% with Liz. I mean, just embrace the awkwardness and just
Yeah.
enjoy it and have
Yeah.
that conversation 50 times and
Yeah.
enjoy it and just let it be awkward if it's awkward at first. Of course, talking to a teenager about sex is a little bit awkward no matter how you approach it or how proficient you are, but it's a topic that needs to be discussed, and it can actually benefit the relationship so much that if you do it once, you'll want to do it again because of how much it benefited the
Agree.
relationship.
okay.
Yeah, it gets easier. I agree.
Okay. And someone else was asking us kind of two questions about this, like how is the legal system, or is it sensitive to and aware of the differences that we're kind of talking about tonight? And also, how does the legal system, like what is their role, or the extent to which they can do a search history? Like can they do one that's more intense than a parent could do, or like what happens there once you get into trouble type
Hmm.
of thing.
Tyler, do you want to
Sure.
answer?
Sure. I think it's very interesting because Liz and Stephen were both just talking about the uncomfortableness that can come with a conversation. I think you encounter that in the legal system as well. I think Liz will speak to, or, will support me in saying there are different judges that have different levels of understanding all over this country. And I'm sure it's that way internationally as well. There are some that are as basic as I had a federal judge in a jurisdiction say to me, young man, do you understand that I'm 83 years old and I have 32 years on the bench? And I said, yes. And he said, I want you to know that there are two types of autism. The kind where someone has problems communicating and they have to do different things like point to things to get food that they want and that kind of thing. And he said, and then there's the other kind. And he pointed to a nicely dressed young man in the courtroom. And he said, that young man has the type of autism we're talking about. He said, he's my law clerk and he has the type of autism we're talking about. So there's that very basic differentiation between neurotypical and neuroatypical, right? And then there are people like a federal judge that I had in a recent jurisdiction that said, you know, I'm going to send 2 different cases, 2 different women to federal prison because they committed white collar crime, fraud in an extent, one with taxes and one with COVID benefits for children with autism. And I want to know what sending them to prison is going to do to their child with autism. And so I want you to bring Dr. Whitney in, and I want him to do a family study. And I want to know what sending them, the parent, to prison is going to do to their autistic child. To me, that's very compassionate. And it didn't surprise me to find out that he had a grandchild on the autism spectrum.
Yeah.
So he's
And
looking for alternative sentences and what we can do to say to this person from a justice standpoint, hey, you know, there needs to be justice and fairness and some punishment, but we also have to take into consideration that this person is caring for someone with autism, and what is that going to do to the person with autism? Very different types of understanding of autism.
Yeah.
So I think you have
one,
to look at each one separately and individually, and, you know, try to do the best you can to communicate your ideas with them that way.
Yeah.
And then Stephen, did you want to add?
yeah, just a very small note. So, this would be in the event that someone is caught with illegal material and they do begin legal proceedings. Law enforcement does have access to tools that the typical parent doesn't have access to that are going to allow them. It's called electronic discovery, and it happens in a lot of these cases. And they do have additional access to what was actually sent, what data was actually transmitted, and access to phones that even someone with physical access to the phone wouldn't necessarily have. So law enforcement will be able to find additional information that isn't accessible to just even to myself to do discovery for a particular case. So it is important that we have that conversation if that ever does become what the situation is, that we have that conversation with the individual to say they will have access to everything. So it's time to just say everything. And it's time to, lay all your cards down on the table because they will essentially have the keys to the kingdom to be able to access everything on that device.
Okay.
And they, you know, Liz, you can attest to this as I can. You know, you're talking about federal attorneys that will subpoena anything and everything, talking about thousands upon tens of thousands of pages of records, depending on how, you know, large the case is and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And early in the smartphone era, they would actually subpoena the technology companies themselves to force them to provide access to the information on these devices, and they've complied. So there's substantial precedent to say that they will get whatever is on the device.
And then Liz, someone was wondering if in your experience, have you seen any kind of correlation between when like obsessions or high interest when someone is younger and their inappropriate use of the internet later?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think um, there are 2 major criteria for the diagnosis of autism. One is an impairment in social communication and social interaction, and the other is the presence of narrow circumscribed interests. So, if you actually have been diagnosed with autism and have autism, you probably have a career of narrow interests. That could start with, US presidents, minerals, Indiana Jones, ceiling fans, and then you will evolve, into medieval knights or, whatever it is that intrigues you. And so I would say that all of the clients with whom I've worked have become very obsessional in their use of pornography, and in the way they catalog and categorize and think about all of it in a really obsessional way. And they have a history of having been interested in other benign interests, before puberty. So, yeah.
Okay. Okay. And then I guess for any of you, any suggestions on how to help children, as they're becoming adults, self-regulate their phones or their devices, especially if they're like about to move out of the house, or, you know, like that's a goal. What are ways to do that?
I'll start. I I think the number one is to lead by example, to show that as a parent that you're willing to set your phone down and lead the charge by not letting those devices overtake your life. And then when you do see the behaviors that you would like to curtail a little bit, that you don't use punishment because this person is an adult, they're getting ready to be independent, that you make it the beginning of a conversation and you say, here's here's why I'm not on my phone right now, and here's why maybe you shouldn't be either. And say that phone time is a time that we set aside to decompress, perhaps. And then once we've done that, we give ourselves a limited amount of time and we explain that very step by step, because someone that's on the spectrum, like we've talked about, is going to need that reinforcement. They're going to need that reiterated to them a few times, not in the sense that they're trying to be defiant or that they're trying to misuse technology. It's just that they need the additional understanding and the additional reinforcement of that behavior.
But what about like the outside influence where everyone is always on their phone?
I so I've had this one with my kids a number of times. So like I said, I have two teenagers. Neither of them has social media right now. We've made a decision as parents right now that our kids can make a decision about social media when they turn 18. And of course, that was met with a ton of backlash, starting from age 9 and continuing right until yesterday, and probably tomorrow. But what we've said to them is that that difference is on purpose and it's intentional. And we call it out and we say that it's a way of them growing in a way that wouldn't be possible if they were on social media. And so I think the same approach would be great here, where we point it out, not just when we see the behavior in our child, but when we see the behavior in someone else, and we say, see that person on their phone right now? They don't need to be on their phone right now either. They're sitting at, maybe they're sitting at dinner and they're waiting for their food to be ready. um, they could be engaged in a conversation. And we point that out to them, not to embarrass that person, but to point out the behavior that we want to curtail in another person, so that it pulls away that sense of punishment even more. That not that we shame that person, but that we just explain they could be doing something else that would be more beneficial. And here's why we're choosing to be different, essentially, is what I advocate.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I think we're all agreeing that, you know, a tenet of sort of training or behavior management is to reinforce positive behaviors as opposed to disciplining undesirable behaviors. So if you sort of catch your child being good, in other words, you're praising and noticing when somebody isn't on their phone. Hey, wow, what did you do? You went outside. That's fantastic. You know, so you're lavishing them with attention when they engage in a behavior that isn't, you know, electronic behavior. But yeah.
Okay, and then two last questions, and then we should be done. The first is kind of, I guess this is directed more towards Stephen, but Xfinity doesn't have the ability to turn off YouTube for a subscriber. Do you think they did that on purpose, or was it just an oversight?
Um, I hold no qualms to the fact that the internet service providers and the media companies are on the same side of that coin, that they are doing everything they can to make sure that we are immersed in content all day, every day. And so I wasn't aware of that particular fact for Xfinity, but it doesn't surprise me at all that a media company that uh, moonlights as an internet service provider also wants us exposed to more media. So uh, I don't know that it was intentional on their part, but I'm sure they didn't necessarily do anything to prevent it either. And I will say that YouTube isn't necessarily a bad thing. Really, what it comes down to is what are they viewing on YouTube? Because there's a lot of amazingly positive content on YouTube, and there's a lot of amazingly negative content on YouTube. And so I don't necessarily think that blocking YouTube outright is the right option. Um, I think it just goes to a discussion about what they're viewing and uh, how they're using that tool. Um, that said, if you do want to block YouTube, there are ways to do it most of the time for most of the situations. And I think there are certainly situations that warrant a complete block of certain sites.
Okay. Okay, then the last question is really, is there a way to find offline social groups that relate to your child's interests and needs if we're kind of, once we find them out? We've talked to them about it. Like, how do you go and kind of find those without using the internet to go do that?
Right. Yeah. Well, I think you're going to use the internet to find out about clubs and organizations in your community in real time, in real space. You're going to, again, work hard to find things that your child, will, it has expressed interest in, whether that's music, building things, kayaks. I had one young man who became very interested in kayaks and ended up working in a kayak store. You have to work hard to listen to find out what you can encourage them to do. And you really have to dedicate time and effort to finding things in creative ways for them in the community.
I love old school networking. I
Yeah.
think it's fascinating when I can tell my kids that I know somebody that knows about that. And then they see me call that person up and say, hey, I know that you know about this and I don't. Could you help me understand it? My kids are like, how embarrassing for you, Dad. But that's me.
Yeah. Yeah. Kids think we know everything about
Right?
everything.
Or in my case, my kids, they think everyone else knows everything, but I
Right.
don't.
Right. I mean, I was going to say, or the opposite. We know nothing about everything.
We know nothing for the parents. Absolutely nothing.
Right. Right. So, well, that's it for the questions we have. And again, I just want to thank you all for doing this. It was great information. I think stuff we can like turn off and start using immediately. I know I really have to watch my not internet use, but I am always on my phone. And, some of it is just, oh, I'm bored. So I'll get on my phone instead of talking to the person next to me, that sort of thing. So, really being the model for that, I think is great. And so, again, make sure you're watching our social media while not abusing the internet at the same time, type of thing. So thank you all for this. I think everyone loved all the information you had.
Right.
Have a good night.